Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. A thin line on a map separates Tajikistan from Afghanistan. In reality, it's a fault line where empires leak, militias hustle, and no one fully admits who is in charge. Last week, that line exploded literally, leaving 5 Chinese workers dead in a place that's supposed to be secured. Drones, grenades, gold mines were turned into kill zones. Dushanbe denies asking for help, Moscow hovers, Beijing watches nervously, and the Taliban promise cooperation with a straight face. So today we ask a simple question with a very non-simple answer. What happens when the people guarding the border may not be the ones deciding its fate? Without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
There recently have been rumors that Tajikistan has become interested in a new deepened angle of cooperation with Russia. This cooperation was reportedly have concerned Russia sending troops to the Tajik-Afghan border to protect it. Such rumors surfaced after 5 Chinese nationals were killed in an attack on the border mining area.
The government of Afghanistan assures the government of Tajikistan of its full cooperation and stands ready for information sharing, technological collaboration, and joint assessments in order to identify those responsible for the incident.
The Tajik government has denied these reports. The story came out from Reuters, which referred to an unnamed Tajik security source who claimed that talks were taking place at a recent CSTO summit. That story has since been removed. Nonetheless, the incident on the border with Afghanistan has put pressure on Tajikistan's government over its apparent inability to protect foreign workers. The issue is particularly concerning for the Central Asian country, as it has been trying to successfully seal several lucrative deals with China. If the situation on the border, which is known to be volatile, is not safe, then foreign companies such as those from China may refuse to operate in the area.
And now, let's zone in on the East-playing portion of our show. Geopolitical shifts are taking place all across Central Asia as the region is looking to break away from Russia's shadow. One such shift is happening in Tajikistan and the state of its relations with Afghanistan and the Taliban in particular.
Tajikistan has begun to warm up to Afghanistan's Taliban government. For the first time in years, the Central Asian country has sent officials to the Afghan capital for diplomatic talks. Some of the hesitation on Tajikistan's part stemmed from the fact that Tajikistan was unsure whether the Taliban's grip on power was stable. After all, putting in serious trade and diplomatic efforts only for the Taliban to be overthrown in a couple of years would have been a major setback. The time is right for Tajikistan to step up its relations with its controversial neighbor. A recent collapse of relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan has led the former to seek alternative trade routes. Tajikistan, meanwhile, is more than eager to complete its endeavors which require Afghanistan's support, such as the Rogan Dam or major transit routes. Tajikistan's recent U-turn marks a dramatic shift in the region's geopolitics, as the Central Asian country had previously been a strong supporter of the Taliban's opposition. Yet given the current situation, which indicates that the Taliban are here to stay, it seems that Tajikistan has decided to take a pragmatic approach, stop supporting the opposition, and strike deals it desperately needs.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Over the last week, remote Tajik borderlands witnessed 2 brutal attacks that killed 5 Chinese nationals working in mining and road projects. The first blast, a drone. The second, gunfire in a mountain village, 2 more bodies. The official finger pointed towards armed militias crossing from the Afghan side, possibly smugglers, possibly one of the usual suspects, Islamic State of Khorasan province, or Jamaat Ansarullah, a Tajik-born extremist network believed to have allied with the Taliban. Now, add to the fog of diplomatic spin, a respected foreign agency reported that Russia might be called in to help patrol the 1,344-kilometer border under the umbrella of Collective Security Treaty Organization. But lo and behold, the next day, Dushanbe yanked itself off the leash. No talks, border stable, false news. The point is, this isn't about one headline, it's about a deeper rot in the foundations of regional security. Because this is not the first time Chinese workers are being targeted. Similar attacks happened just a year ago, and it likely won't be the last. The geology of the mountains hasn't changed, but the politics around them? Now that's shifting fast. Meanwhile, the Taliban in Kabul, bless their new peacekeeping hearts, say they will cooperate with Dushanbe, and Russia quietly flexes its muscle, polishing its old boots near Tajikistan. Others watch and wait. To borrow from the miners themselves, this frontier isn't just rugged, it's radioactive with suspicion, betrayal, and death by grenade. And until someone redraws the lines, expect more dawns with smoke on the mountains. Because at this border, it's not about who crosses, it's about who decides what and why after. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Pannier, board member of the Caspian Policy Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so help me get this straight. Let me know if I get this correct, because the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan is having a border dispute with Tajikistan, resulting in some Chinese guys getting shot, and somehow supposedly the Russians are being asked for help. I feel like I'm diving into a very long-running series, like 500 episodes in, and yeah, the whole thing seems very convoluted. For someone watching who's also just diving in now, can you help us kind of sum this up and lay out all the key players in this whole convoluted mess?
Yeah, it's turned into quite a fiasco, and you're right to mention China. I mean, at the heart of this is China, right? There's a river that divides Tajikistan and Afghanistan. In this part of the border, it's called the Pianj River. There are Chinese companies that are mining gold on both sides of the river. Now, on the Afghan side of the river, the construction that they had to do to mine the gold diverted the river so that the water level is higher on the Tajik side of the border. So the Tajiks were really unhappy about this. We don't know what happened in late August when, but for some reason or another, there was a conflict between Tajik border guards and the Taliban, and they actually shot at each other. Tajikistan and the Taliban do not have good relations, although recently that's been improving, but they never shot at each other. So several Taliban fighters were killed. The Tajik border guard commander in the area went across the river, talked to the local officials and the Taliban, and they seem to have calmed down the situation a little bit. Then in late October, it happened again. And we have very, very few details about that. Just sketchy reports from the Afghan side of the border saying that Tajik border guards and Taliban were shooting at each other, again, in the same area where the Chinese are mining gold on both sides of the river. There were several casualties. We don't know who. And then the whole incident just seemed to vanish. Now, all of a sudden, we get to the end of November. There's someone on the Afghan side of the border flew a quadcopter, a drone, but a basic quadcopter with grenades attached to it, and bombed the Chinese gold mining camp on the Tajik side of the border and killed several Chinese workers and wounded a few more. Then just a few days after that, in an area not very far away, somebody, and the word I got was that it had to be a sniper because they were fairly adept with their marksmanship, shot dead 2 Chinese road workers and wounded a couple more on the Tajik side of the border. So that has led to first there was a report that said the Tajiks were so worried about this that the Tajik government that they called for help for the Russians. That turned out not to be exactly true, although I should mention at this point that several Russian officials responded to this by saying we haven't had a request for additional aid from Tajikistan, but we already have people in Tajikistan, which is true. The FSB is helping Tajik border guards. Presumably they are also in the area where all this has been going on.
Right, there's so many angles that I want to tackle this, but first of all, I'm curious about their current relationship. Like you said, the relationship between the Taliban and Tajikistan has always been a little bit iffy, but seems to be a little bit better now. However, at the same time, while we're seeing supposedly negotiations, people sitting down, we're also seeing shots getting fired at the border. In reality, what does that relationship look like?
Yes, this is a good point. I mean, it's kind of ironic, to put it coldly, that the two sides. Not long after the Taliban returned to power, there was fears that they were actually going to engage in some kind of conflict. I mean, both sides were threatening each other. They finally, this year, at the start of the year, they finally started to negotiate a little bit more and openly. The Tajik government still doesn't confirm like any of this, but there's been visits by Taliban officials to Tajikistan. There have been Tajik officials. In fact, there was a government delegation that just visited Kabul in November, right before the shooting of the drone attack on the Chinese gold mining camp. So at the same time where they actually have established something of a low-level dialogue, the actual conflict along the border has turned deadly for the first time. So it's a strange situation where they are talking with one another for the first time. And while this is going on, they're actually shooting at each other for the first time since the Taliban returned to power.
Right. And another very kind of, well, I wouldn't call it contradictory, but a little bit foggy is actually the reporting coming out from it. Like you mentioned, there's some sketchy reports of things happening in there. Also, they've been denying the fact that Russians were asked for help, even though Russians are on the ground. What contributes to the kind of, I wouldn't even call it fog of war because it's not like a full-blown war, but the fog in the information sphere is even more closed off than active war zones.
Okay, there's a couple things going on here. And it's really the Tajik government. You know, the Taliban, for all their many faults, and there are many, the one thing that they do is whenever because they're so anxious for international recognition that anytime they meet with anybody, they'll put it up on all the social networks right away. Here's our delegation meeting with somebody in whatever country, or here's a delegation from another country that's come to Kabul and meeting with us. The Tajik government is totally different. Excuse me. They hardly ever confirm or deny any of this. They don't. State media does not report on any of this stuff. So this is a problem. Partially because the president of Tajikistan is Emomali Rahman. He is the only leader currently in power in neighboring states of Afghanistan that was also in power the first time the Taliban showed up in the late 1990s. He was against them then. He has not changed his policy. It would be very difficult for him to change his policy because he has been an outspoken critic of the Taliban since the mid-1990s. So how do you justify turning this around and saying, okay, well, it's essentially the same group. They're committing the same abuses and rights violations, but for whatever reason, now we're going to decide that we're going to be friendly with them. It's a difficult 180 to pull off. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. Also, of all the Central Asian countries, the Tajiks in Tajikistan identify with their ethnic kin, the ethnic Tajiks of Afghanistan, much more closely than the other, let's say the Uzbeks in Uzbekistan identify with the Uzbeks in Afghanistan, and the Turkmen in Turkmenistan identify with the Turkmen in Afghanistan. So the relationship between the Tajiks on both sides of the border is much closer. The Tajiks in Tajikistan are aware that the Tajiks in Afghanistan are being victimized by the Taliban, run off their land, routinely arrested, accused of spying or somehow conspiring to overthrow the Taliban government. So it would, it's when Rahman, who's very unpopular actually in Tajikistan, when he speaks out on behalf of the ethnic Tajiks in Afghanistan, that actually boosts his popularity at home. It's one of the few issues where people in Tajikistan rally around the president when he criticizes the Taliban for their treatment of ethnic Tajiks in Afghanistan. So like I said, that makes it even a little more confusing, I suppose, but it's one of the things that's made it difficult to figure out what's going on along the border, because the Tajik government will not say almost anything about what's going on there at all. Did it happen? Yes or no? And they have no comment. Did you shoot and kill anybody? They don't say yes or no. Was anyone hurt on your side? They don't say yes or no. So you always have to get the information about what's happening along the border from Afghanistan, or in the case of the shooting of the Chinese workers, because the Chinese embassy in Tajikistan complained and said, you got to do something about this. And of course, they put out a warning to all their citizens in Tajikistan to leave that area where there's been the conflict.
All right. You mentioned the relationship between Tajikistan and, well, the Taliban goes back to the 90s, which is quite consistent. But for other leaders in Central Asia, it's actually relatively new to having to deal with the Taliban as a government. How's their relation with the current Afghanistan government, which is the Taliban?
I suppose they benefited a little bit from the leadership in Central Asia. It's all new. I mentioned that Rahman's the only one that's still there in the late 1990s. So the other Central Asian governments are able to pivot a lot more easily because they have new presidents, or at least newer presidents. So they're able to say, well, I wasn't part of the 1990s, so this is going to be the policy. One of the benefits of the U.S.-led campaign in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021 was that the connectivity between Afghanistan and Central Asia was increased hugely. I mean, there was almost nothing connecting the Central Asia to Afghanistan prior to 2001. Now there's electrical power transmission lines that are exporting Central Asian electricity into Afghanistan, roads, a railway that was extended, actually two other railways that are come out of Turkmenistan, one that was there from Uzbekistan that's been extended. So there's all kinds of new possibilities, including the long ago proposed Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India natural gas pipeline. All these projects are now possible and more. The Central Asians, when they look at Afghanistan now, in a lot of ways, they look beyond Afghanistan, not just as their neighbor, but what's on the other side of Afghanistan, meaning Pakistan and possibly trade with India. So they're working on railway projects, road projects, fixing up the roads, with the hope that if Afghanistan is stable, that means that they can take advantage of all these infrastructure projects that were built in that 20-year period and actually continue to benefit off that and increase the benefits from that by reaching Pakistan and ports on the Arabian Sea, and that way increasing their trade with Eastern Africa, India possibly, the Gulf states. So they took a much more pragmatic view of the Taliban this time around and just said, look, we might not be friends and we might have different ideologies, but perhaps we can reach a business relationship which will benefit everybody. And that seems to be where they are right now.
Right. Last thing, you mentioned a lot of these information are coming up because the Chinese has essentially reacted to it, having had their people killed. Do you think that they will step in at any point, and how do you think that might impact the Chinese relation or their standing in this area?
They'll certainly help the Tajiks to increase security along the border generally, but certainly in the area. All these conflicts the shooting I've been describing and the drone attack all happen in the one same area, essentially. I mean, it's within an hour's drive. So it's very close. I imagine that they're helping out with that. The curious thing about all this is that there's a lot of suspects for what could have happened. But the Chinese that are on the Afghan side of the border haven't been hurt. So the Chinese told the people in Tajikistan that are in that area, please leave. They're undoubtedly helping the Tajik government secure the area where the Chinese are working, not probably just there, but everywhere that the Chinese are working in the area. The Chinese have helped in the past. They do have a base, strangely, way in far eastern Tajikistan, very close to the Chinese border, which is kind of a forward observation post just to make sure that nobody creeps across the border from Afghanistan. It's also very close to the Afghan border, that no one creeps across the border from Afghanistan and tries to enter China through the back door, so to speak, right there in Tajikistan. So they have been cooperating with them. They do have their own security concerns. I mean, the Eastern Turkestan Islamic movement is in Afghanistan. They are an Uyghur group that came out of the Xinjiang province in Western China. That's specifically who the Chinese are looking for, but more generally, anyone who might destabilize China by crossing from Afghanistan into Tajikistan and coming through the mountains into China. So they're helping. But, there's only so much that they can do. It's a mountainous area. They're in the grand scheme of things, I suppose they're weighing the consequences of is losing 5 Chinese workers worth, a ton of gold out there. It's a cold calculation, admittedly, but that's probably the way they're looking at it.
Right. Thank you so much for your input and insight and helping us unpack all of this. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thanks again for having me.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. In the wake of the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, Russia has found itself without its traditional ally in the Middle East. While Moscow maintains ties with the Syrian government, its influence is a shadow of what it was.
The most recent meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara has showcased the shift in relations between the two countries. Instead of trying to maintain the same degree of control over Syria as it had in the past, Russia seems content to use its fractured influence to keep its important military bases in the country. In exchange, the Russians have pledged to help reconstruct Syria in the wake of the Syrian civil war. In particular, Russia will print Syrian currency and support the country in terms of energy. Moscow had been a staunch ally and supporter of al-Assad's regime and had helped the former Syrian leader in fighting off al-Shara's militant group, which took over the country last year.
The Russian Supreme Court has found yet another entity that it has decided to label a terrorist organization. This time, the target of the Russian state apparatus is the exiled Russian Duma lawmaker Ilya Ponomaryov's Congress of People's Deputies.
The Supreme Court claims that the Poland-based organization has, quote, aimed at propagating, justifying and supporting terrorism, a very common accusation that the Russian court has leveled at various organizations in the past. The Congress itself had previously been labeled an undesirable organization by Russian authorities in 2023. The escalation to the current level means that the Russian state is committed to further crackdowns against opposition initiatives. The Congress of People's Deputies describes itself as a kind of shadow parliament comprised of exiled Russian politicians. It sees itself as a possible transitional government should the current regime in the Kremlin fall.
Central Asia and Pakistan are being brought closer together through their shared trade policies and security concerns. Decades of mutual distrust are being put aside in the name of pragmatic deals and endeavors.
One of the driving reasons behind Central Asia's eagerness to play ball with Pakistan is that they are for the most part landlocked countries. Improved relations with Pakistan would open the region up to the Indian Ocean and offer new trade opportunities. Although trade between Pakistan and these nations is growing, especially with Kazakhstan as it has doubled between the first 7 months of 2024 and 2025, it is still fairly low in absolute volume. One of the ways in which the involved parties want to boost trade is through expanded rail links, in particular through Afghanistan, though the recent security crisis between Kabul and Islamabad has proven to be a major obstacle to this project. For Central Asia, warmer relations with Pakistan are yet another sign of the region becoming heavily interested in diversifying their trade partners and dropping dependence on Russia.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.